What's up, people? I'm Anbraxas, and in this video we're going to be discussing Resilience, PvP power, and what it means in Mist of Pandaria at level 90. Let's get it started. Alright, so let's get a few things straight before we actually get into the video. Some of the information in this video is provided by Eldacar at battlemasters.org. It's a great website. They have some great articles. You can read the article that I'm using some of the information from in full on their website. The link is in the description box below this video. Check it out. I highly encourage you to go over to this website and take a look at everything. It's particularly helpful, and if you're looking for rated battlegrounds, come Mist of Pandaria, you're going to want to use the looking for group chat feature to find some of those if your server doesn't have a whole lot of interest in that. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what we're going to be displaying in this video. We are going to be talking about the exponential returns of PvP Resilience. We're going to be talking about total effective health with PvP Resilience. We're going to be talking about PvP Resilience's diminishing returns. Then we're going to be talking about the baseline 40% damage reduction that players are receiving in Mist of Pandaria. You can use the annotations at the top of this video to skip to any part that you would like to see or re-review. Now, that being said, I would like you guys to watch it the whole way through because there is a lot of valuable information that will help you out in gearing your character in Mist of Pandaria. Alright, let's talk about the exponential returns of damage reduction. Basically, what this means is the more damage reduction you have on a character, the more valuable additional damage reduction becomes. For this example, we're going to take our Orc Warrior here. We're going to take this Mage. Now, the Mage is about to hit the Orc Warrior with a Fireball. And let's say this Fireball is going to do 100 damage. If the Warrior has a 0% damage reduction, he will be hit for 100 damage. But let's say we give him 1% of damage reduction, or 1% resilience. That 100 damage is now reduced to 99 damage. Effectively, that's blocking 1% of total damage. However, say our Orc Warrior here has 90% damage reduction. That Fireball, instead of hitting for 100 damage, is now hitting for 10. Now, if you add 1% to his 90% damage reduction, that Fireball, which was reduced to 10, is now further reduced to 9. That change in incoming damage from 10 to 9 is actually a 10% reduction in actual damage taken. Here's a graph that Eldacar made that shows the value of damage reduction increasing as you gain more. Alright, now looking at this graph, we can see that at a 50% damage reduction, any additional reduction beyond that is now worth twice as much as normal. To put that into context, we're going to go back to our 100 damage Fireball. If our 100 damage Fireball hits its target, and that target has a 50% damage reduction, the Fireball will only now do 50 damage. That effectively means that you need 2 of the same Fireball to equal the original amount of damage, meaning that damage reduction is now worth twice its value. At 90%, it becomes worth 10 times as much as normal. And that is because the same 100 damage Fireball reduced by 90% now does 10 damage, and it now takes 10 Fireballs to equal the same amount of damage as the original. Now, that might be a little confusing, and you'd wonder why wouldn't that happen at 100% reduction in damage, and that's just simply because at 100%, absolutely no damage occurs. Okay, so let's talk about the diminishing returns on PvP Resilience. Let me start off by saying that the diminishing returns on the Resilience rating is not intense enough to cancel out the returns you're going to get from the damage reduction. Now, if that confuses you, take a look at our example here. We have our Warrior, and we have that 100 damage Fireball up here. This Warrior has 0 Resilience rating, which means he has a 0 reduction in damage. Now, the way Blizzard likes to control the overall scaling of Resilience is through the way diminishing returns function. That's how at the start of an expansion, a flag carrier may have 60% reduction in damage, and at the end of an expansion, he won't have 80 or 90% reduction. He'll still be somewhere around the 60% reduction area. Now, we're going to use some hypothetical numbers here to illustrate this. Now, these are hypothetical numbers, so don't get your panties in a bunch. But let's say this Warrior is now given 1000 resilience rating. And for whatever reason, it gives him a 90% reduction in damage. Now that 100 damage fireball, hitting him would only do 10 damage now, which is kind of weak, but that's what you're looking for. Now the way diminishing returns function is any resilience rating on top of this should make it seem a little less valuable, but it's actually not. You will still always get a better return by adding resilience rating. To demonstrate this, let's give him another 1000 resilience rating, giving him 2000 total. Now let's say, because of diminishing returns, instead of him jumping up above 100, he now only has that 91% damage reduction. And that fireball now only hits him for 9 damage. That fireball was reduced by 10%, which means even though he had to gem and do all kinds of things to get that additional 1000 resilience rating, it was still worth it because it still reduced the overall damage incoming. So one thing we need to mention is the baseline PvP damage reduction, that 40% that everyone was given, because it does affect the way that you gear your character. So in order to exemplify this, we're going to be comparing Cataclysm to Mr. Pandaria. And we're going to be using a PvE geared player and a PvP geared player. So looking at our PvE geared player in Cataclysm, you can see they have a 0% PvP damage reduction, while our PvP geared player has roughly a 45% damage reduction. Now what's changing in Mr. Pandaria is that gap shrinking. Since everyone is given a 40% baseline, we're going to set our PvP player up and our PvP player up for 40% here. Boop. What we're looking at is that gear is giving you less damage reduction than it did in Cataclysm. Our PvE gear player, who has no PvP gear on, has a 40% damage reduction. While on the other hand, our PvP geared player has a 58% damage reduction. It is still viable to gem for resilience if you're looking for additional survivability because of the increases in damage reduction and how they scale exponentially. But the gap's actually been shrunk between these two players. Now there is still a gap, with PvP power being included on PvP gear, but we'll get into that in the next video. I just wanted to demonstrate how the gap has been closed, damage reduction wise, but that it is actually still effective to go ahead and reduce that damage by gemming for resilience if say you're a flag carrier. So the last thing we'll be talking about is your effective health. For this example, we'll have our warrior and our 100 damage fireball. We're going to give our warrior a 100 health pool. Now, if this fireball hits the warrior, it's going to kill him instantly because it'll deplete all 100 points of health he has, because he has a 0% reduction in damage. However, if this warrior gains 50% damage reduction, and if you recall earlier in the show we were talking about how over 50% it's worth twice as much, it will now take 2 100 damage fireballs to kill him, because each fireball will only do 50 damage. That actually means his effective health is 200, because it takes 200 damage total to deplete his 100 life. And this is how resilience scales. So if you did actually manage to get up to a 90% reduction in damage, it would take 10 fireballs to actually kill this 100 health warrior if they all were doing 10 damage each. I'm Anbraxas. I hope you've enjoyed this and found it very informative. I encourage you again to go over to battlemasters.org and read this article in full. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series where I'm talking about PvP power. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.